Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse Robbins, and welcome to LPLE from Dialogue FM. We're the podcast that lets you practice listening in English. We speak English slowly and clearly so that you can follow along and understand native English speakers more easily. I'm excited to help you improve your English listening skill, as well as help you learn new vocabulary, grammar, and idioms commonly heard in conversations among native English speakers. If you want to practice listening in English, then we invite you to join our conversation. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jesse.
For the listening audience, this episode is going to be a little different. Normally, you hear Jane and I talking at a slower speed, right? But today, we decided that we're going to have a regular speed conversation like Jane and I normally do when we're not recording. So, if you cannot understand our conversation, don't worry. You can always listen again. That's why we do podcast. You can listen many times. If you have a question about what we're saying, let us know. Send us a message on Facebook, and we can talk about it. For now, I just want to encourage you to follow along as Jane and I talk at our normal speed about the topics we usually talk about when we're not recording. First thing, of course, Jane, is politics.
Which is crazy because I'm not really very political.
Yeah.
But as we've said any number of times now, Americans do take their government quite personally. I think there are countries where people don't really, well, they know their government's there doing things. They assume that the government is corrupt. They even may chuckle, or they're afraid of the government. But Americans at least believe that this government is our government and that we should have some awareness of it, and we should be able to understand it and maybe even approve of some of it. And now so many of us are in a position of complete mistrust of who's in there. And, of course, there's a new scandal every day.
Oh,
and
my gosh, yeah.
On one hand, it's entertaining. On the other hand, it's disturbing and not surprising. We expected it. And finally, there's the sense of, wait a minute, I have a life and I need to pay a little more attention to it. How's that going for you?
Politics should not be entertaining. Politics should be very boring. And we should just assume that we have elected people who can just do the thing for the betterment of our society. And I have never seen such contempt in, like, just straight out spite and derision and in our politics.
You mean on both sides, on all sides?
Right. Okay. So I agree that the Democrats definitely have some of that, but I admitted now, okay, I am biased. I fully acknowledge this, right? Okay. You and I both live in Seattle. We are both West Coast people. We're both liberals. We both vote Democrat. This is kind of what we do.
Yes.
That said, like, admittedly, the news that I'm receiving doesn't strike me as Democrats doing anything spiteful.
No, I see what you mean. They're certainly, I would say they're doing their best to look at the dark side, though. I don't think I have the sense that things are presented in a way that does not put the new administration in a good light. Although I agree, the language remains relatively respectful. And when possible, they try to explain the other side when they've got some information. Occasionally, I've thought I've been concerned that the headlines have been a little too general and a little bit too negative. So you really have to read the article and say, okay, there was a mitigating circumstance here or something. But no, just in terms of what people in the administration, the main people who are charged with press relations, and the president himself, use very derisive language, fairly uneducated language, dismissive, and now they're being caught in lies and scandals and misbehavior and talking about it as being unfair.
Okay, so a couple things. Number one, answering your first question about how things are going on my end.
Yeah,
I can't look away. I'm
We're like fascinated.
It is morbidly fascinating.
Yeah.
And this is where I become apoplectic. This is so much. There's so many emotions I'm feeling that I can't describe it. I'm frustrated. I'm disappointed. I'm admittedly amused for some weird reason. I'm becoming increasingly exhausted. And this is something you and I talked about
emotionally
before, right?
exhausted.
Right.
I was joking with you earlier that, Seattle was, I think, so traumatized by really since the elections that a lot more than I've ever seen. People are going around with colds and coughs, and I think we may have compromised our collective immune system by being so stressed and worried, and shocked, also.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that there's an event that you got word about in your neighborhood.
In my neighborhood.
Right.
We have, I imagine everybody in my little neighborhood probably voted Democratic. I'm not sure, but let's just say that there is a neighborhood email list, and it's interesting. I think that the two people who reached out in the neighborhood felt confident enough that most of the people in the neighborhood would sort of understand where they were coming from, felt confident enough to say, we don't know how to process what has just happened to us politically. Would any of you like to set up a neighborhood sort of discussion circle to discuss what we might do? And so the first meeting, it took a long time to get everyone together, and not everyone responded. But I found it interesting that the neighbors didn't hesitate to sort of assume that most people felt the same way. In previous elections, one would not do that. You wouldn't want to, as we say, step on somebody's toes. You wouldn't want to insult or offend someone because you wouldn't be sure who they might have voted for. But here, it was so, again, taken for granted that everyone was upset, that the neighbors, these two women who reached out to try to organize this group, felt that they weren't being unneighborly by reaching out. So we'll see what happens. The impression I got from the very beginning was not necessarily how do we continue the resistance, but how do we try to find a way to reach across the gap?
How do we do that? I mean,
good question.
I'd love to hear from you if you attend this meeting. We live in Seattle in such a bubble, a tight bubble, that we literally have to drive far to to meet people who have different political views.
Yes.
We literally have to get in our car and drive maybe 30 minutes in another direction, at least.
To find a significant concentration of people. Yes, I think you're right.
So when we talk about how we're going to bridge the divide between the left and the right, the blue and the red, the Democrats and the Republicans, the Trump supporters and the Hillary supporters, like, unless we're going into these neighborhoods and having these discussions, I have no idea how we bridge, how we have a compromise and encourage both sides to talk without just talking about it amongst ourselves in theoretical terms, right?
Exactly. I'm not sure either. And certainly, so far anyway, I think the evidence suggests that everything that people hear that should really make people concerned about who's in the White House, people are saying, well, so what? I mean, people that aren't, so I it's, as you can tell, I have no words for it. I remember that, hearing that after it became quite obvious that there had been some Russian interference in the elections, a Trump supporter said, I don't care.
Our side won. Yeah.
Our side won, and if it took that to make sure that Hillary Clinton didn't win, I'm satisfied. Also, I hope someday a biography is written of Hillary Clinton that exonerates her and that documents how much calculated damage was done to her reputation over the last 2 decades. And I'm sure, because this is somebody who really worked for, women, children, and family values her entire career. And, she got a reputation for something else, and it doesn't make sense.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. It sounds like it seems pretty apparent that there was a massive amount of character assassination that was just nothing more than one side trying to win over the other. From a qualification perspective, to say it was clear is going to make people who don't support Hillary infuriating. I'm trying not to care as much, but I personally felt I clearly agree that she was definitely the more qualified candidate. Qualified is putting it lightly. She has decades of literal political experience.
Yeah.
And so here we are, right? How do I not get increasingly frustrated about
But
this?
I think I didn't address what you said about reaching across the gap completely. I'm not sure what we do, because it appears that both camps sort of don't really want to listen. I'm not sure what we do yet. I am worried that the Democrats not do what the Republicans did during the Obama administration, which was really, as you've been saying, to put winning ahead of anything else and preventing the other side getting any kind of a win. So what was best for the country, for example, jobs and infrastructure? President Obama actually presented something in 2011, I think, sent a bill to Congress for jobs creation and infrastructure building, but it was kind of dead on arrival because the Republicans were going to reject it out of hand. So I hope the Democrats don't do that. I hope everybody takes a deep breath and says, wait a minute, is it possible that there's a good idea here that we can work together with the Republicans on? At some point, the desire to win has to get a little bit attenuated or softened.
How do we break that cycle, right? How do we break that cycle of trying to win all the time? Because that's all politics has turned into is teams, tribes, sides, just trying to win over the other person. Yes, we've had 8 years of obstructionism. Like, there's no denying this. And I feel like there are strong Republican supporters who see the past 8 years as just trying to hold on to American values. And so we had to be obstructionists for the betterment of the country, for the good of the country.
And I think they genuinely in their hearts believed that.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't just about winning.
Right. But I also feel like there's a significant number of Republicans who didn't want the Democrats to win any victory points. So, for example, the national health care, the ACA, Obamacare, right? So my understanding and my impression is that this was so appalling to the right, to the Republicans, not on any kind of philosophical principle, but because it would ingratiate so many current and future voters, and all the credit would go towards the Democrats.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't want the Democrats to, again, my opinion only, but it feels like it didn't, the Republicans who out and out rejected and continued to fight against the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare, did it not because they thought that they had a better solution, because they never produced one in 8 years.
And they're not doing it now.
And we've forgotten about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it had everything to do with not letting the Democrats look good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I know that there were other issues, insurance companies, lobbies, that sort of a fear that we might become somewhat socialist, heaven forbid. I know that all of that had something to do with it, but I think you're probably right. Who wouldn't look good if they managed to create a system where you could get your health care guaranteed and for not too much money? And they wouldn't like us to get that. I'm very pleased to see that a lot of members of Congress who are on both sides are getting lots of questions from their voters about their health care. And it looks as though they're beginning to back away from trying to change it.
Well, that's the fear. So my fear is that they're not backing away. They're not talking about it so that people will forget amidst all of the crazy scandals happening right now. And then at the 11th hour, it just sounds terribly conspiracy theory here, but I do believe that I do fear that what's going to happen is at some obscure hour of the evening, different riders of bills are going to be implemented such that it's going to chip away at the Affordable Care Act.
Maybe.
They're going to do it in ways that it's not going to get a lot of press, because Trump acting crazy is probably the best thing right now for the Republican Party, who wants to dismantle lots of President Obama's policies. It's like, let Trump grab the headlines so that the actual lawmakers, the actual politicians who actually know what they're doing, will just try to start gaining victories politically. That's a huge fear I have that I think is going to happen.
Yeah, and well, the sort of, there is a beginning of a movement towards resistance, which I think started with the Women's March, which had as many men in it as women, or nearly. But certainly a lot of the communication is about stick it to your member of Congress. Keep watching what's going on in Congress. So hopefully there'll be, some awareness there. And certainly I think, is it the Washington Post that's doing such excellent reporting right now in terms of fact-checking, making sure that what's said is what the reality is behind what's being said?
Washington Post, New York Times, Time. I mean, all of the large publications are trying hard to keep up with the utter amount of lies and alternative. I don't even want to use that word. You heard that phrase, alternative facts?
Yeah.
That hurts my brain. That makes me so frustrated. It sounds like the media has finally remembered what the heck they're supposed to do for our society.
I think you're right. I've thought of that too, that they're actually doing a lot of investigation, checking up on things. That's why I've been sort of impressed about how the media has stepped up. And that's why when I see an overly generalized headline in a good newspaper, I think, wait a minute, guys, be careful. Don't push anything too far. At least we are, the truth has to be told as closely as it possibly can, because it's hard to get information. But in terms of our personal lives, we have to find a way to live with this and not be getting sick over it, getting exhausted, not being able to talk or think about anything else, which is the case of a lot of us right now.
The second part you mentioned, the exhaustion, is a big risk right now. There have been protest after protest, demonstrations after demonstrations. I think we're going to get fatigued. I truly believe that this is a game that Donald Trump and Steve Bannon are playing with us, which is, let's do crazy stuff as much as possible so that people eventually stop caring. They get tired, and then the real nightmare begins.
I think you're right, and we have to sort of marshal our energies, because this is going to be the long run, or at least the next 2 years until the midterm elections may shift Congress. I also want to mention that sort of everywhere you look in the world, there are protests and demonstrations for different reasons, not just about what happened in America. So this is an interesting time. I think there's a great global shift too.
I realized, so I'm looking at our recording here, and this is not bad what I'm about to say, but we talked about politics for 20 minutes, and that makes sense because it is so important to us right now, and it consumes so much of our mental energy and our emotional energy.
That's right. That's right.
There's lots of things that you and I normally talk about, our lives, our personal projects, our relationships, society. But
today we just had to let it out.
That's exactly it. It's very cathartic to just finally talk about politics on the microphone. Look, so I'll talk to the listening audience now. For everyone who's made it this far into this podcast, yes, in America, we talk a lot about politics, especially now. Because we are in a very crazy historical time in our lives, in our nation. We have to care right now. There's no choice. We can't give up. That's what Donald Trump wants us to do. He wants us to give up. And if we give up, he wins, and then many different people's lives are negatively affected, and we can't do that.
Maybe 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, we will look back and say that thanks to Donald Trump, we woke up and made a better country. Maybe in some long run, he will have served a purpose.
Right. Well, what I'd like to do is, every now and then, let's just do one of these recordings where we just talk at our normal speed. I realize when we do LPLE, we have to force ourselves to talk slowly and clearly, which is fine, which is great for the audience. But I think it'll be good for the audience to hear what we normally sound like too.
Okay.
And also hear what we normally talk about as individuals.
Yes.
So thank you very much for these episodes and for engaging in political talk on this.
Thank you, Jesse, and thanks to our patient listeners.
Indeed. All right. Thank you for listening to this episode of LPLE. Let's practice listening in English from Dialogue FM. Subscribe to LPLE on iTunes to hear the latest episodes, or listen to past episodes on our website, dialogue.fm. That's dialog.fm. If you have questions or comments about English, or if you would like for us to use a word, grammar, or idiom in our conversation so you can learn how to use it correctly, we would love to hear from you on Twitter at dialogue.fm or Facebook at facebook.com/dialoguefm.